We spoke briefly on the last video, or the video before that, about justice. We were answering some of the queries by some of the youth with regard to political justice, and therefore we were paying attention mostly to what political justice was and how it differs as far as Islam is concerned. The idea of fairness, which does not exist actually in egalitarianism. They're talking about equality. But why don't we say what my father has been saying, and that is that justice begins and ends with the self. This is what my father has been explaining for the past decades of his life. When he wrote The Nature of Man and the Psychology of the Soul, he described the various stages of the soul, because as we know, man, in other words insan, is both body and soul. Now, this soul, it has various maratib, various ranks, the lowest of which he describes as being the nafs al-amara bisu, bestial nature. A little bit further up the rank, so to speak, is the nafs al-lawama, and then of course there is the nafs al-mutma'inna. Now, why did he describe these various stages? Is because when he said justice begins and ends with the soul, what he means is that because the soul and the body are one, when the soul is connected to the body, it forgets its true nature. In other words, it becomes forgetful. That's why we are called insan. So the challenge now for man is therefore to try to be reminded of his true nature, which means that he has to put aside this bestial or animalistic soul of his, which is connected to the body, to try to suppress that inclination towards the vices, towards lust, towards greed. And he has to try to do battle with that inclination in order for him to reach the higher stage of the soul, which would be the lawama and the nafs al-mutma'inna ultimately. That, in essence, is putting your soul in its proper place, and that is true justice. That is the battle which is the most difficult one to overcome. And this is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ meant when he said the greatest form of jihad is the battle against the self, because that is the most difficult to overcome. And this is what true justice really means: to suppress that inclination towards the wants, the needs, the greed, the kind of lustful emotions, these kind of things. You cannot do or succeed in any other endeavor without first having dealt with your inclinations of the soul towards the vice. You have to try to overcome those vices in order that you reach this virtue which we call justice. It's not easy, and you can see that with all that is going on today, not only in the Muslim world, but in the world in general. We have injustice all over the place. Look at how we have political injustice, where we include racial politics, which is absolutely wrong. That is unjust. That is something that is intolerable to the religion of Islam. On top of that, we have environmental injustice. What we are doing to the environment, we are destroying it at our own hands. It is not Allah that does it. It is us. There is an ayah in the Quran that says, verily Allah will not change the fate of a people unless they change it themselves. And frequently, this ayah has been misunderstood and misinterpreted by none other than the politicians and their followers amongst whom are the fraternity of the so-called ulama. What they have said is that this verse means that Allah will not change the condition of a people for the better unless they do it themselves. In other words, they want to try to emphasize effort on the part of the human being, on the part of humanity. But that is not what the verse actually means. What it means is that Allah will not change the fate of a people for the worse unless they change it for the worse themselves. And therefore the onus of responsibility is on man, not on God. What we do in our environment towards ourselves is our own doing. It is not Allah who does it, it is us. Therefore, if we corrupt our souls, if we allow greed to fester, if we allow lust to fester, if we allow corruption to fester, it is we who are doing it to ourselves, and we are doing injustice basically to ourselves. We are doing injustice to our true nature, and it is we, our soul, that is going to suffer later on. A lot of what we do today, our actions don't seem to reflect that we understand that what we are doing is our own doing, and that we are going to be held accountable for it. Because if we really truly understood that we were going to be held accountable, and we continue to do that, we are either stupid, we are either arrogant, or we are either just completely apathetic to it. And I find that to be a bit incredible to believe. Political injustice is rampant in this country. Someone was asking me today, how do we overcome this? How do we find people who are upright and trustworthy in order to lead us? Well, one of the characteristics of true justice is uprightness, trustworthiness, truthfulness. These are some of the characteristics. You also have temperance, you also have courage, you also have tolerance, none of which the politicians of today embody, in my opinion. So he was asking, well, how do we overcome this? Well, it is up to you. If you truly understand your purpose and your true nature, it is up to us, it is up to you to overcome this. How do we do this? We have to reform every single institution, not just the political institution of the executive, the judiciary, as well as the legislative. But every single institution needs to be completely overhauled, which means there needs to be a complete overhaul of the system itself. You can find the people who are actually upright, trustworthy, truthful. You can find them, they are here. But they are not amongst the fraternity of politics today. They are outside of that fraternity. If you allow those people to speak, if you allow those voices to be heard, then you can see a substantial step towards true reform. What about environmental injustice? Excuse me. What we are doing to the environment, again, reflects our own self, our own nature. If we are inclined towards greed, which is unjust to ourselves, if we incline towards lust, which is unjust to ourselves again, if we incline towards covetousness, which is again against our own true nature, we are doing injustice to ourselves. So those who are doing injustice to themselves, you cannot expect them to do justice to the environment. Look what's happening now. Even if we were to say that we were going to somehow magically find some sustainable form of living together with the environment, sustainability in terms of energy, in terms of food, in terms of water resources, in terms of waste, that we were going to reform the whole environment. It is never going to be reformed or changed for the better unless we first change ourselves for the better. Because if you find a substitute for what we have now in terms of energy, we are still going to be greedy for whatever that thing that is substituting energy for. The same goes for if we find a sustainable way of finding clean water or finding food. When we find that, we are going to be greedy for that. It is not going to change the way we abuse what we have. So first we have to find it within ourselves to try to suppress that inclination towards greed, towards lust, towards covetousness of everything around us. If we are able to do that, and if we are able to suppress that within ourselves, then we can say that we have truly discovered how to live sustainably. This is very different from the United Nations idea of sustainability, where they're just looking for a sustainable replacement for what we have today. What we are saying is, well and good, find a sustainable replacement. But in the same token, not only do we have to find a sustainable replacement, we also have to practice moderation. We also have to practice use only what you need, what you truly have to have. That's it. Don't be greedy for the whole lot. Look at what we find today in business world. All of that is unjust. How is it that when we read the Quran and we see the story of the Prophet Moses, and we see in that story of the Prophet Moses there lived a man called Qarun. If you understand the story of this Qarun, his lust for money and greed for wealth and covetousness of the things that he had ultimately buried him. That's the thing that sealed his fate. But today, in 2020, we have many of these Qaruns. The ones who are greed for money, greed for wealth, lusting after and coveting things. These people exist, and they are aided and abetted by those people in the government. This is very unjust, and it also shows you through their behavior that they don't understand what justice is. So if we want to actually practice this justice properly, we have to remove those who do not understand justice, or who refuse to understand justice, or who habitually turn their eye towards it. We have spoken at great length before about the education system being broken. We have said that before, decades ago, that the system of education in this country is completely broken. It's fractured. We can't use the same thing anymore. And yet we haven't learned from that. We continually find ways to try to overhaul the thing by only tweaking things a little bit. But what we are saying is it doesn't need a tweak. It needs a complete overhaul. But if those people who are in power are not listening, they don't understand justice. And they think that we are the ones who don't understand, that we don't understand education. Because for them, it appears as though the more you keep the people ignorant, the better it is for them. Because the ignorance, they don't understand truth. Many of the Muslim scholars before have said that the one who spreads false knowledge is more dangerous than ignorance. That's why on the last couple of videos, I can't remember which video it was, when I was telling you about the 4 classifications of people. Excuse me. The 4 classifications of man. The first being he who knows and knows he knows. He is an alim, therefore follow him. The second being he who knows but knows not he knows. He's like the one who sleeps, therefore warn him. The third being he who knows not and knows he knows not. These are people of ignorance, simple ignorance, therefore teach them. The fourth one, he who knows not and knows not he knows not. These are worse than the donkey. Stay far away from them. These people who are the ones who are he who knows not and knows not he knows not, these are the most dangerous of all, because they are consumed by an overarching arrogance. And it's because of this arrogance that they fail to see their mistake or error. That's why in one of the first videos I mentioned that if you are that kind of a person, you are immune to criticism. And what's worse is, the immunity to criticism is what gives you entitlement. But in the same token, this feeling of entitlement makes you immune to criticism. So how do we overcome this? We overcome this by completely removing those who have no understanding and who corrupt everything before us, because we can see from their behavior that they don't understand justice towards themselves, and they don't seem to care. They don't seem to realize that there is going to come a time when they're going to have to face their maker. How are they going to answer? Do they not see that? There are many hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says those people who on the outside, they pray, they fast, they do zakat, they do all the practical elements of the religion of Islam. But at the same time, they steal. They steal money from the orphans, they steal money from people, they steal the ra'yat's wealth. They cheat, they corrupt. They do all that. their good deeds, when they die, their good deeds will be distributed amongst their victims, not them. They will not be accountable for their good deeds, and therefore they will be punished. But they don't seem to understand this. What we are trying to say is we are trying to just give a good piece of advice. You either have to do jihad against yourself, and let's not try to make this term jihad as if it's some kind of a bad word. It is not. It has only become so because of the actions of certain of the Muslims. Again, you cannot blame Islam for what they do. You blame ignorance, you blame corruption of knowledge for what they do, not the religion of Islam. I think that's all for now.